Today's a journey from the ancient to the modern, an analysis of roots that run so deep they are hard to trace, though they have grown and survived all the way into our modern era. It is one of yokai, of oni, and yūrei, demons, sometimes benevolent, sometimes frightening. That is the breadth of Japanese folklore, not merely a collection of old stories in dusty books, but a window into the cultural psyche, values, and spiritual life of the Japanese people across centuries. There are core themes, the tension between nature and civilization, but we'll also talk about the significance of liminal spaces, concepts of spiritual purity and pollution, and all the moral lessons embedded in the supernatural lore. And we'll also have a look at the regional traditions, from Tohoku's snowy villages to Kyushu's subtropical islands, showing how these local environments gave birth to their own unique legends and rituals. It's been highly requested that we continue our folklore series and end up with the Japanese episode. And so today, here we are. We are fulfilling that obligation for you, dear viewer. And so before we begin, allow me to welcome you to the channel. If you're new here, it's your first time, well, I bid you a very warm welcome. It's good to have you here, and I invite you to click that subscribe button. As always, I'll remind you that this video and all of the other videos on the channel are all mid-roll free, so you're not going to get any interruptions halfway through. This is because we are supported by the Patreon and YouTube members, also the merch store, and the occasional donation. All links can be found in the video description, channel description, and pinned comment. But if you really want to do us a solid, then just give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and also hype the video. It all helps in the algorithm. And tell your friends too. We're always growing on this channel. So, we invite you to relax for the next hour, and we can go into the very interesting world of Japanese folklore. Enjoy. Of course, you can't understand Japanese folk tradition without looking at those Shinto roots. The creation myths as well. They were recorded in texts like Kojiki and Nihon Shoki, and they recount how the islands of Japan were born from the union of gods, that is, kami in their tongue, such as Izanagi and Izanami, and this established a sacred foundation for their later folklore. So let's understand them first, because they set the stage for a worldview in which the landscape is very much alive with spirits, mountains, rivers, forests, and even humble tools, inanimate objects. They all possess a spiritual essence. As centuries passed, oral tales and local legends grew around these beliefs, blending native Shinto ideas with the imported Buddhist cosmologies to explain every little bump in the night, every little run of bad luck or twist of fate. But moving into the Heian period, which is 794 to 1185, we find a rich corpus of folklore intertwined with the elegant aristocratic culture and superstition of the era. The Heian court was a place of refined art and literature, but also a very pervasive belief, that is, in mononoke, unseen spirits, or maleficent forces, and of course, onryo, vengeful ghosts. In fact, some of Japan's earliest recorded ghost stories come from Heian literature. A famous example occurs in the well-known tale of Genji no Monogatari, an 11th century novel where the living jealous spirit of Lady Rokujo leaves her body to torment her rivals, most notably causing the mysterious affliction and death of Genji's wife, Aoi no Ue. Well, this episode reflects the Heian belief that intense emotions like envy or rage could manifest as roaming spirits, blurring that line between the supernatural and the living. While the capital, Heian-kyo, now Kyoto, was often gripped by fear of goryo, that is, the angry souls of those who died unfairly or were wronged by ruling elites. In fact, court historians describe how sudden plagues, fires, or disasters were attributed to these vengeful ghosts. For instance, after the exiled statesman Sugawara no Michizane died in 1903, and Kyoto was struck by calamities and lightning fires, many believed quite firmly that these were because of his wrathful spirit, seeking revenge on the imperial court that wronged him. So what's the response? Well, the emperor hastily reinstated Michizane's honor and enshrined him as a deity of scholarship to placate his angry spirit. A telling example of how folklore directly influenced real political and religious actions, all the way up to the top levels of society. But another illustrative Heian tale is that of Oni, demons or ogres, and the heroes who battled them. Stories of demon-quelling warriors became quite popular, blending folklore with emerging samurai legend. A classic anecdote is the legend of Shuten Doji, a fearsome Oni leader who was said to terrorize the capital by kidnapping noble maidens. According to lore, the emperor commanded the renowned warrior Minamoto no Yorimitsu, also known as Raiko, and his band of loyal retainers to hunt down this demon on Mount Oe. While disguised as monks, Yorimitsu's group infiltrated the Oni's lair, and then they tricked Shuten Doji into drinking poisoned sake. As the drunken giant fell unconscious, the heroes decapitated him, carrying away his severed head as proof of victory. Well, this tale, though rooted in the late Heian era, survived in oral tradition and inspired countless artworks. No plays, that is NOH, by the way, that's their kind of theater in Japan, and later folk tales were also inspired by this. And it also highlights a recurring motive in Japanese folklore, that is this cleverness and courage triumphing over the monstrous forces of chaos. Well, even more intriguing is how such demon legends often carry such symbolic weight. The Oni in Shuten Doji's story can be read as representing the wild, lawless fringes beyond the capital, ultimately subdued by human bravery with a little bit of divine favor. Heian Japan was also the era of the onmyoji, the master diviners and exorcists of the yin-yang path, whose existence itself straddled the line between folklore and historical reality. Now, the most famous onmyoji, Abe no Seimei, became a kind of legendary figure on his own. He lived in the 10th century and was employed by the court to perform folk rituals to ward off evil spirits and discern auspicious signs. Over time, Abe no Seimei's reputed powers, such as controlling shikigami, that is, spirit servants, more or less, but also outwitting demons, these were all exaggerated in folklore and popular drama. Certainly makes for a good story. And by the medieval period, he was mythologized as a half-human, half-fox being with supernatural insight. A story that shows how historical individuals could be elevated to folkloric status, embodying the era's deep fascination with the occult and the balance of cosmic forces. The Heian period's contributions to folklore resonate in later centuries. The concept of restless spirits, the need for appeasement rituals, they all became ingrained in Japanese culture. Annual ceremonies like the Goryo-e, rituals to pacify the vengeful souls, were performed to calm any angry spirits lurking around in the city. And these customs show an interesting synthesis, a little bit of religion, a little bit of folklore, and a little bit of governance, where the supernatural was addressed through formal rites to ensure the well-being of society. Really, if we're going to sum it all up, this classical era of Japan established many of the core motifs that we can identify with Japanese folklore. Unpredictable spirits, influenced by human emotion, demons lurking at the edge of civilization, and the importance of rituals and clever heroes to restore harmony. So with all those foundations laid, We can certainly trace how folklore evolved in the subsequent periods, especially during the vibrant storytelling culture of the Edo era and beyond. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. 1603, the beginning of the Edo period, and we find an explosion of interest in ghost tales, monster lore, and popular legend. Now, the Edo era, characterized by over 2 centuries of domestic peace, a rising merchant class, and a flourishing of the arts, it became a golden age for folklore, not just in performative form, but in the more new and modern printed form. Originally, people used to gather for the parlor game Hyaku Monogatari Kaidankai, that is, the gathering of 100 supernatural tales. Basically, they'd tell ghost stories one by one, extinguishing a candle after each tale until an eerie darkness had fallen. Now, this game, quite popular among samurai and townsfolk alike, it fueled the creation and dissemination of many kaidan, that is, ghost stories. It was said that when the last candle went out after the 100th story, something truly supernatural might be summoned. An idea that shows how deeply storytelling and belief intertwined in entertainment and ritual. Pretty interesting, that's for sure. I suppose, as the candles go out, the last 10 to be kind of a countdown, making everybody increasingly nervous. Now, one of the most iconic Edo-era kaidan is Yotsuya Kaidan, the chilling story of Oiwa, a betrayed wife who becomes a vengeful ghost. The tale first appeared as a kabuki play in 1825, and has since become Japan's most famous ghost story. Well, in this tale, Oiwa is tragically poisoned and disfigured by her unfaithful husband and his lover. After her death, her spirit in yūrei form returns with stringy hair, a drooping eye, and a blood-stained face. She's come back to take her revenge, haunting her treacherous husband and driving him to madness. The imagery of Oiwa's apparition, often depicted with a white burial kimono and wild black hair, helped cement the archetype of the vengeful female ghost in Japanese culture. And to this day, theater productions of Yotsuya Kaidan are treated with a kind of superstitious reverence. Actors even pray at Oiwa's grave for forgiveness before they do the performances. The moral underpinnings of the story are pretty clear too. It serves as a cautionary tale about betrayal and cruelty, and that reflects the Edo period value placed on marital fidelity and social ethics, but with a supernatural twist that wrongdoing will eventually be avenged, whether it be in this world or the next. No one really gets away with it. It all catches up with you in time in a kind of karmic cycle. And then we have another beloved Edo tale, that is Banjo Sarayashiki, the story of Okiku and the 9 plates. Basically, Okiku was a loyal housemaid who accidentally, or in some versions deliberately, broke a dish from a precious 10-plate set. Well, in a fit of unjust anger, her master killed her and threw her body down a well. Okiku's ghost, therefore, haunted the estate, emerging from the well each night, wailing and counting from 1 to 9 before bursting into tears upon finding the 10th plate missing. This repetitive, ghostly counting, of course, terrorized the household nightly. And ultimately, depending on the version, perhaps it's a priest or a clever servant, they shout 10 at the end of her count, and that resolves the haunting by symbolically completing the count of plates and calming Okiku's spirit. Of course, the story not only gave Edo audiences a delightful scare, but it carries these themes of injustice and the need for resolution. You see, her ghost only finds peace when the wrong is acknowledged, symbolized by completing the count. And the tale became so popular that it inspired woodblock prints, and even local superstitions about wells. People peering into old wells at night might imagine a pale figure rising, counting dishes. And of course, Maybe you're thinking of the movie The Ring. You know, how the white-dressed and long black-haired girl start crawling out of the well. Well, there is the origin. In any case, beyond ghosts, the Edo period also systematized a pantheon of yokai, that is the myriad of monsters, trickster animals, and strange phenomena that constitute Japan's monsterology. A key figure in this endeavor was the scholar-artist Toriyama Sekien, who published a series of illustrated encyclopedias of yokai in the late 18th century. Seiken's works, such as Gazu Hyakiyagyo, the illustrated night parade of 100 demons, catalogued creatures from folklore and his imagination, giving them visual forms and written descriptions. In fact, many popular yokai today owe their fame or standardized image to Seiken's depictions. For example, he portrayed the Kappa, a water goblin, as a scaly, child-sized creature with a beak-like mouth and a dish-like depression on its head, containing the water that is the source of its strength. And then he sketched the tengu, the long-nosed goblin, as a winged humanoid living in the mountains. He also included whimsical entries like the Karakasa Obake, a one-eyed umbrella that hops around on a single leg, an example of the tsuku monogami, everyday objects that come to life after 100 years, that is. Seiken's catalogues were widely read in Edo, much like bestiaries or illustrated guides to supernatural Japan, and they helped spread and standardize local legends into a more unified and recognizable national folklore. And so, in a sense, this was folklore scholarship avant la lettre, a precursor to formal studies, though Sekien did it in a more playful and artistic manner. But this era was also a time when literature and theater embraced folkloric themes. Ueda Akinari, an 18th century author, drew from earlier folk tales and legends to create literary masterpieces of the supernatural. His famous collection, Ugetsu Monogatari, Tales of Moonlight and Rain in 1776, features elegant ghost stories layered with moral and Buddhist philosophical messages. One story, for instance, the Chrysanthemum Vow, tells of undying friendship tested beyond the grave, while another, the Cauldron of Kibitsu, depicts the lingering curse of a scorned wife, again highlighting the moral that broken promises and treachery leads to deadly hauntings. These works bridged oral folklore with high literature, and they show that ghostly tales could carry deep human truths and even political commentary. By weaving folklore into refined prose, Akinari elevated the genre's prestige and ensured these legends would be preserved among the educated classes, not just in the rustic countryside. We're quite lucky to have this sort of thing, the legacy of Japanese culture. So, the Edo period's love affair with folklore culminated in a vibrant ghost story culture by the 19th century. People enjoyed scary stories during the hot summers, believing that chills from fear could actually cool you down. While many of the ghost and yokai tales from Edo remain staples of Japan's folklore canon today. And just as importantly, the era's printed books and artworks created an archive of folklore that later generations and scholars could draw upon. So when Japan opened to the world at the end of the Edo period and modernized rapidly in the Meiji, this treasure trove of recorded folklore would prove invaluable for those who wish to remember and celebrate the old tales, albeit amid the new, sweeping societal changes. And so with the dawn of the Meiji era, that being 1868, Japan went through changes, rapid industrialization, but also rapid westernization. The transformation posed a challenge to the old folk beliefs, you see. Some viewed them as superstitious and incompatible with modern science and progress. But despite all this, folklore proved remarkably resilient and adaptable. In fact, the late 19th and early 20th century saw a renaissance of interest in collecting and preserving Japanese folk tales, fueled in part by both native scholars and curious foreigners. One notable figure was Lafcadio Hearn, also known as Koizumi Yakumo, an Irish-Greek writer who settled in Japan in the 1890s. Hearn was enchanted by Japan's ghostly lore and traveled the country gathering stories, much like the brothers Grimm did for German folklore. His 1904 book, Kaidan, Stories and Studies of Strange Things, introduced English-speaking audiences to spectral tales like Yuki Onna, the Snow Woman, and Hoichi the Earless. The latter is Hearn's rendition of an old legend, which the blind biwa lute player Hoichi performs for the ghosts of samurai and is saved from their clutches only by having holy sutras painted on his body. Except for his ears, of course, which the ghosts tear off when they find those ears invisible, that is, not covered by the sutras. Hearn's works were not academic studies, I suppose, but they did play a role in preserving oral tales at a time when Japan was changing into modernity, and might have even been tempted to leave its old ghosts behind. In any case, we're very lucky to have that work too, I think. But during the 20th century, Japan's rapid urbanization and the horrors of war, also the economic upheaval, they could have consigned folklore to obscurity too. But instead they just gave it new forms and contexts. The rise of mass media, the first radio, then television, later the internet, it allowed ghost stories and yokai legends to be shared in new ways. Folklore themes found their way into modern literature, film, and eventually anime and manga. For example, the concept of the onryo, the vengeful spirit, from Edo Period kabuki was reimagined in the contemporary horror cinema. The famous image we've already mentioned, Sadako, the pale long-haired ghost from Ring in 1998, or Kayako from Ju-on, also known in the West as The Grudge. Which, yeah, that's a very scary movie. It draws directly from the archetype of Oiwa and other traditional ghosts, showing how the old motives still haunt the modern imagination. And really, you owe it to yourself to go and watch the original Japanese versions of The Grudge. Not before bed. Oh, they are, well, they've aged quite well. But to me, even the way that, even just the way, the graininess in how they were filmed, it's quite a disturbing piece of media, I think. But nonetheless, go and watch it. In any case, quite similarly, beloved children's anime like Gutenberg no Kitaro revolve around yokai characters adapted from folklore, such as Kitaro's father, who's essentially the Hitoran no Oyaji, an eyeball with a tiny body. Presents them in a friendly, whimsical way, too. Mizuki Shigeru himself was a folklorist at heart, who traveled across Japan to sketch and document local yokai stories, contributing to a revival of interest in traditional monsters in the late 20th century. And you really can't go past mentioning Inuyasha as well. That was a good show. Old one, I think it was 90s. You should go watch that too. Well, modern Japan has also generated new urban legends. They carry the spirit of folklore into a more contemporary setting. The classic example from the 70s is Kuchisake Onna, the slit-mouthed woman, an eerie figure said to roam late at night in the streets wearing a surgical mask, which is quite common in Japan, so initially not too alarming. If people get sick or something, they'll usually wear a surgical mask to not pass it on to others. In any case, according to legend, she would approach lone pedestrians, often children, and she'd ask, "Am I beautiful?" Well, if the person answered yes, she would remove her mask to reveal a grotesquely slit-open mouth from ear to ear. And then she'd ask you, "How about now?" Well, if the victim reacted with horror, she would attack them with scissors. The modern folktale spread like wildfire through a word of mouth and sensationalist reports, causing real panic at schools at one point. Essentially a contemporary yokai tale, complete with a moral of sorts, I suppose. Be careful of strangers. Appearances deceive. And of course variations have evolved over time. Some say that carrying candy or saying certain phrases can ward her off, much like one might use a charm against a yokai. And another widely told modern ghost legend is that of Hanako-san, the spirit of a young girl who haunts school bathrooms, usually the third stall of the third-floor girls' restroom. Children across Japan know the dare of knocking on the stall and calling out, "Hanako-san, are you there?" to see if the girl responds. These stories aren't really old in a historical sense, but they still function exactly like traditional folklore. And they're told orally too, or at least nowadays via the internet. I remember the old days of chain emails with ghost pictures. If you don't pass it on, the ghost is going to get you. Back in the old Hotmail days and MySpace, showing my age a bit. But they've also got regional variations too. And I suppose there's a bit of thrill and a bit of caution reflecting social anxieties. Now, for instance, that Kuchisake Onna, the slit-mouthed woman, she emerged at a time of rising awareness of random violence, and perhaps even subconscious fears of changing social roles, since she's often depicted as a former victim of a male aggressor. Well, meanwhile, many folk practices and festivals continue to thrive in modern Japan, and they're often supported by local and national efforts to preserve cultural heritage. Annual events like Obon, that is the summer festival when the ancestral spirits are welcomed back home, remain widely observed, and it blends both Buddhist ritual with ancient ancestor worship beliefs. During Obon, communities light mukaebi, that is welcoming fires, and toro nagashi, floating lanterns on rivers to guide the spirits, a rather picturesque tradition rooted in the folklore's view of the border between life and death being porous at certain times of the year. And then there's regional festivals too. They often celebrate folkloric characters. For example, every New Year's in Akita Prefecture, that is northern Tohoku, villagers enact the Namahage ritual, where men are dressed as ferocious ogre-like beings to visit houses to scare children into good behavior and bring blessings. What outsiders see as frightening monsters are the locals' protective figures performing a rite of passage. Again, it gives a bit of depth to these beings. But the government and cultural organizations now designate many of these folk customs as intangible cultural heritage, recognizing that preserving folklore is as important as preserving monuments. And so in urban settings, you might find summer ghost story events, theme parks or museums dedicated to yokai, and young people reading manga or playing games filled with folkloric reference. All of this shows that folklore in modern Japan is not a relic of the past, but a living and very evolving part of the culture, adapting and finding new life as time goes on. So let's get away from the chronological approach for a while, because we've sampled folklore across time enough, and I think it's time we look at a few more, several core themes and symbolic motifs consistently emerging in Japanese folklore. Not all of them unique, but some of them quite Japanese in their style. First of all, let's talk about nature versus civilization. It's a predominant theme, and it's the tension between the natural world and human civilization. You see Japan's terrain, the thick forests, the towering mountains, remote islands, has always posed a stark contrast to its densely populated villages and cities, and folklore often personifies this contrast through spirits and creatures that embody nature's power, reminding humans to respect those forces beyond their control. And we see this in tales of the mountain kami, or yama no ke, the god that guard the forests and peaks, rather. For example, Tengu we've mentioned, those long-nosed, bird-like goblins. They lurk in the mountain strongholds and punish woodcutters or proud monks who intrude too arrogantly into their domain. In the lowlands, the kappa inhabits rivers and ponds, ready to drag the unwary, especially misbehaving children into the water. Stories like this are cautionary tales. They're warnings to villagers, especially youngsters, about the dangers of straying too far into wild places or disrespecting the elements. And the implication is quite clear. Nature is alive, and nature is watching. If you violate its rules, you might incur the wrath of the supernatural guardians. This theme symbolizes the delicate balance that Japan has long negotiated between the wilderness and civilization. Rice farming communities depended on tamed nature, fields, irrigation, so on. Yet just beyond the paddies lay untamed woods, believed to be the realm of the yokai. Many festivals and local customs have developed to appease natural spirits, suggesting a social acknowledgement that human prosperity relied on cooperation with the unseen forces of the world. A vivid example comes from Tohoku's Tono region, where villagers traditionally left small offerings by riverbanks to placate the kappa and prevent drownings or crop damage. Folklore here encodes a form of environmental ethics. Treat the river well, don't pollute or waste its waters, and the kappa will not bother your family. Across Japan, there's countless folk tales of animals like foxes, the kitsune, or raccoon dogs, the tanuki, that take human form to test people's kindness or humility. If a lost traveler offers help to a fox disguised as a frail old man, he might later be rewarded with good fortune. The fox may have been the messenger of the Inari deity. But if a person acts arrogantly, he may be led astray by a shapeshifter or become a cautionary example himself. The next thing we have is another key theme in Japanese folklore. It's liminality, the importance of thresholds, borders, and in-between states. Many supernatural events in these tales happen in liminal spaces or times, showing the belief that boundaries between our world and the other world are quite porous, and should of course be approached with caution. Twilight, the dusk, literally called Tasogaredoke, literally who is it time, was thought to be especially treacherous, as it's neither day or night, a time when yokai and yūrei find it easiest to slip into the human realm. And indeed, a number of ghost stories begin with a lone traveler finding himself on a road at dusk, when shadows lengthen, and a friendly stranger met at a wayside could turn out to be a fox in disguise, or a ghost leading them astray. Similarly, certain seasons and festival days are considered to be liminal. During Obon, the boundary between the living and the dead thins so that ancestral spirits cross back into the world of the living. On New Year's Eve, the old year, turning to new, is marked by rituals like ringing temple bells 108 times to drive away negative influences, symbolically guaranteeing the liminal moment so no evil follows into the fresh year. But physical thresholds also abound in folk tales. The bridge is a classical liminal space neither here or there, suspended over running water, which is itself another boundary. It's no coincidence that one famous no drama and legend, the story of the Hashihime, the bridge princess, features a woman who transformed into a demon while waiting on a bridge at night due to jealousy. She became a vengeful spirit said to haunt Uji Bridge. In many stories, a villager's bridge, or mountain pass, is exactly where one might encounter something otherworldly. Like, for example, the Yuki Onna on a snowy mountain path, or the Oji Baba, the old crone yokai asking travelers strange questions at crossroads. And even the threshold of a home, the entryway called Genkan, has its protective folklore, placing a protective charm or a Kagura Suzu, a ritual bell that is, and the door can ward off evil from crossing into that domestic space. And of course, the notion of tsukumogami, tools or objects coming to life after long years, plays on the liminality between the animate and the inanimate. An old sandal or teapot at its 100th year steps over a metaphorical boundary and gains its own spirit, suggesting that even the line between object and living thing is not absolute in folklore logic. But why exactly an emphasis on liminality? Anthropologically, we could say it reflects in how Japanese culture ritualizes transitions to ensure that they are auspicious. Folklore, in turn, populates those transition points with vivid imagery to warn and remind. So if you must travel at dusk, be extra vigilant. If you stand at the border of a village at midnight, remember unseen eyes might watch. It instills a respect for boundaries and transitions, whether they be life stages, or perhaps spatial edges like the coastline, where one might meet the wrathful sea spirit Umi Bozu on a boat. Liminality in Japanese folklore ultimately highlights the idea that most powerful or uncanny things happen at the edges, that is, either society, the edges of the day, of life and death, and that one must navigate these edges carefully, often with reverence and sometimes with ritual. Well, next we have purity and pollution, i.e., a kind of spiritual cleanliness. Underlying much of the Japanese folklore is the concept of spiritual purity versus a pollution. It's called kegare. This theme is heavily influenced by Shinto beliefs where maintaining purity is essential to avoid any misfortune, and defilement, especially by death or violence, attracts evil. And many ghost stories can be interpreted through this lens. Ghosts are often the result of a disruption in the natural order, something impure that was not cleansed, a soul that cannot move on, perhaps because it suffered a wrongful death or improper burial rites. It becomes a yūrei, a wandering ghost, essentially a form of spiritual pollution troubling the living until things are set right. For example, in the tale of Oiwa or Okiku mentioned earlier, each becomes an angry ghost due to an egregious wrong, that is either betrayal or murder, and they need to atone for them. The haunting continues until someone acknowledges the crime and performs the appropriate appeasement, whether that be prayer, ritual, or a full-on exorcism, thus purifying the environment or the grudge. Folklore also encodes daily life purity rituals. The akaname, a rather grotesque yokai depicted as a slimy creature that licks the dirt in untidy bathrooms, is essentially a personification of filth, kind of like a demonic cockroach of sorts. The tale warns that if you don't clean your bathroom, the akaname might come. An amusing yet pointed reminder that uncleanliness invites unwanted company, figuratively and supernaturally. Likewise, there are beliefs that evil spirits are attracted to places of decay or impurity, and this ties in with why many Japanese folks even today sprinkle salt at the door after attending a funeral. You see, salt, in Shinto tradition, purifies and blocks any clinging spirits of the dead, who are considered ritually unclean, from entering the home. And another example is the kappa's aversion to iron. In some stories, since iron used to make blades and knives is thought to repel spirits and purify by cutting ties, hence fishermen would sometimes throw iron scraps into rivers to ward off kappa. The interplay of purity and impurity is dramatically seen in the practice of misogi, that is, water purification. Many folk tales and shrine legends involve people washing away sins or curses in waterfalls or rivers. The folklore of certain waterfalls or hot springs often claims that they have originated from a deity's tears or blood and therefore have the power to cleanse illness, which in older times was seen as having a spiritual cause. For instance, Tono Monogatari, describes how villagers avoided certain river spots deemed unclean because a kappa had in the past attacked someone there, until a priest could at least come and perform rites to purify the area. Whether it's a ghost driven by unresolved defilement, or a monster embodying physical dirt, or even a hero cleansing a cursed place, the theme of purity versus pollution is woven throughout Japanese folklore. It shows a moral that is both practical and spiritual. Keep yourself and your surroundings pure in behavior, thought, and environment, and you will invite protection from the good spirits, and in turn repel the malevolent ones. And if impurity occurs, whether through moral wrongdoing or contact with death, it must be acknowledged and cleansed through proper ritual, or else that darkness might fester. Next, let's talk about a little bit of the morality and justice, these themes that are pervasive in supernatural tales. Supernatural tales often serve as allegories for ethical conduct, with karmic consequences doled out by otherworldly agents. Unlike straightforward moral fables, though, Japanese ghost and yokai stories teach morals in a more nuanced way, frequently using fear and awe rather than direct didactism. We have already noted how many yūrei tales caution against betrayal, murder, or broken oaths, since the aggrieved party might come back from the grave to settle the score. And this instills a sense of justice beyond the human legal system. Even if a crime goes unpunished in human courts, no deed is truly secret or forgotten in the spiritual realm. The belief in enkiri, ties that sever, that death cannot even sever, rather, means that if you wrong someone deeply enough, you are bound together until justice is achieved, whether in this life or as ghosts. It's a powerful moral deterrent against cruelty and treachery. Likewise, yokai tales serve to reinforce social norms and values. The trickster, fox, and tanuki stories, for instance, commonly reward honesty and kindness while punishing greed and arrogance. A well-known folktale tells of a poor woodcutter who kindly frees a trapped tanuki, that is a raccoon dog, just to remind you, and later, the tanuki, possessing shape-shifting powers, turns into a teapot and asks the woodcutter to sell it for money. Then it, after that, reverts to tanuki form to escape the buyer and return to the woodcutter, essentially providing him financial assistance. Well, this tale, often called bunbuku chagama, highlights generosity repaid with generosity, but it also carries an implicit lesson about compassion for even the smallest beings. Conversely, other tales describe villagers who mistreat a fox or a tanuki, only to suffer pranks, bad luck, or even horrifying illusions in retribution. And these outcomes reflect a kind of folk justice. The world of spirits and animals will not suffer human hubris lightly. Folkloric beings also often test the virtues of humility, diligence, and respect. In one charming story, a traveling monk, who might have been an incarnate deity in disguise, comes to a village and is shunned by a rich, proud family, but welcomed by a poor farmer's family. So the next day, the rich family's home is found mysteriously burned down, or their wealth has vanished, while the humble family is blessed with unexpected prosperity. Such tales, with variations across regions, show the classic moral lessons of hospitality and humility. Now that supernatural element, a monk with hidden powers or a divine stranger, just amplifies the weight of the lesson, making it more memorable and, I suppose in a way, culturally authoritative. And another moral dimension in Japanese folklore is the idea of reciprocity and obligation, on and giri in Japanese social virtue. When someone receives a great favor, even from a supernatural being, they are expected to return it, or at least not take it for granted. Folktales illustrate the dire consequences of failing to uphold one's giri. For example, The legend of Urashima Taro tells of a fisherman who rescues a turtle, actually a disguised undersea princess, and is rewarded with a journey to the dragon palace under the sea. He stays there for what seems like a few days, but when he returns to his village, he finds that many years have passed, and so has everybody he once knew. In some versions, this twist is simply a sad consequence of Taro's neglect of time, but in others, it's subtly framed as Taro's fault for leaving without properly expressing gratitude and saying farewell to the dragon palace. Either way, the story imparts a moral about respect for gifts and the inexorable flow of time, a warning that one cannot just indulge in wonder without a regard for real-world responsibilities. But just as Japan's geography spans from subarctic Hokkaido to subtropical Okinawa, the folklore of Japan varies widely by region too, with each locale contributing to its own colorful threads to the national tapestry of tales. So let's start first with Tohoku, that is northeastern Japan. It's known for its long, harsh winters and rugged mountains, and it has folklore that reflects both the challenges of rural life and the close-knit nature of its communities. One famous figure here is the Zashiki Warashi, a house spirit in Iwate Prefecture, appearing as the ghostly image of a small child, sometimes with a bobbed haircut and red vest. The Zashiki Warashi is said to reside in old farmhouses, bringing good fortune to those who honor it, but misfortune if it leaves. Many families in Tohoku historically left out offerings, like small meals or toys, to keep their Zashiki Warashi content. The idea of a protective child spirit may have arisen in this region due to high infant mortality in earlier times, which is obviously tragic. Also the desire to believe that deceased children's souls stayed to watch over the home and the parents. An example of how folklore provided comfort and a sense of guardianship amid those living in difficult conditions and going through life's little tragedies. Tohoku's landscape also gave birth to chilling winter tales. In the snowbound villages, people told of the snow woman, the Yuki Onna, who appears on blizzardy nights as a beautiful pale woman in a white kimono. In some local stories, she is benign, guiding lost travelers to safety, and in others she's deadly, luring men to freeze to death or stealing the life breath of children. The dual nature of it reflects the winter itself, mesmerizingly beautiful but potentially lethal. Parents might have used the tale to warn youth against the danger of winter storms. Don't go out in the blizzard or the Yuki Onna will get you, while also personifying the awe they felt toward the silent, otherworldly snow landscapes. Another well-known Tohoku tradition is the Namahage of Akita, which we touched on a little earlier. The Namahage is essentially New Year's demon. Villagers dressed as fearsome ogres with straw cloaks and oni masks that go door to door, growling phrases like, "Are there any lazy children here? Any naughty children?" Well, this practice, unique to the Oga Peninsula of Akita, is both a festive ritual and a living folk tale. It reenacts the legend of ogres that once tormented the area until villagers made a pact with them, only to scare children on New Year's in exchange for peace the rest of the year. The exact custom is deeply local, tied to the agricultural calendar and the year's end renewal, but also the social need to encourage youngsters to be diligent. Tohoku's remoteness historically has allowed such customs to persist, and today they are celebrated as part of regional identity. Next we have is Shikoku. As the smallest of Japan's 4 main islands, Shikoku is famous for its 88-temple pilgrimage route associated with the Buddhist monk Kukai, or as he's also known, Kubo Daishi. But it's equally rich in local yokai and legends. Shikoku's wooded mountains and rocky coasts harbor tales of some frightening creatures of their own. One notable yokai said to roam Shikoku is the Ushi-Oni, literally cow demon. Descriptions vary, but it's often depicted as a monstrous creature with the body of an ox or spider and a horned Oni's head. The Ushi-Oni was feared for attacking fishermen and villagers along the coast, and in some areas during festivals, locals parade large Ushi-Oni floats or puppets as a way to ward off evil and commemorate the legends, turning a scary yokai into a kind of protective symbol. And this is a great example of how a community can take a negative folkloric figure and ritually transform it into a guardian, essentially saying we acknowledge the danger of our coast, like storms, rough seas, unknown beasts, but by ritually taming the Ushi-Oni in celebration, we hope to gain its favor or protection. The existence of Ushi-Oni lore along Shikoku's coast highlights how isolated islands and communities invented powerful creatures to personify the perils of the sea and cliffs. Shikoku is also known for stories of bake tanuki, that is, shape-shifting tanuki. While tanuki tales exist all over Japan, Shikoku's Iya Valley claims a very famous one, the legend of the 800 brave tanuki of Shikoku. In this story, different tanuki clans, each led by a chieftain with a colorful name, like Danzaburu Tanuki of Sado Island and Kincho Tanuki of Awaji Island, engage in a grand war of trickery, only to later reconcile and become benevolent. One local hero tanuki from Shikoku, Yashima no Hage Tanuki, was said to drum on his big stomach to entertain people, and even have helped in a historic battle by frightening enemy soldiers with ghostly flames that he conjured. It's a playful yet epic folktale, and it possibly emerged from Shikoku's many isolated villages, where telling tall tales about clever tanuki would be a popular pastime on long evenings. But it also reflects Shikoku's rugged terrain, since human warlords seldom reached its hidden valleys. The tanuki could be imagined as staging their own mock battles in the folktale realm, I suppose. Region-specific folklore like this fosters local pride, too. Even a tiny hamlet can claim this is where the mighty tanuki general beat his drum, linking the community's identity to a story not found in other places. Additionally, Shikoku has folklore tied to its religious heritage. The 88 Temple pilgrimage has generated countless anecdotes of miracles and yokai encounters. One tale tells of Kobo Daishi meeting a dangerous yokai woman in the mountain pass who tried to waylay him, only for his prayers to reveal her true demonic form and send her fleeing. Now, moving on to the southernmost main island of Kyushu, we encounter a warm climate, active volcanoes, and a history as a crossroads of trade and foreign influence. It's these factors that color Kyushu's folklore. For instance, Kyushu has numerous fire-related legends, which is understandable, given the presence of volcanoes like Mount Aso and Sakurajima. In Kagoshima, people told of Hinoemna, a fiery horse demon, or of Katakirawa, a one-eared piglet spectre believed to appear in the aftermath of fire disasters. Kyushu particularly, its eastern edges and southern parts, has a tradition of tsukimono, that is possession spirits, that is stronger than in many other regions. One infamous example is the Inugami, the dog god, which is actually a kind of malevolent spirit used in sorcery, thought to bring wealth or curses depending on how it's implored. Belief in Inugami was historically prevalent in parts of Kyushu and Shikoku. Some families were stigmatized as Inugami mochi, that is, keepers of the Inugami, and feared by neighbors, who thought that they could send their invisible dog spirit to possess and harm others. The origin of Inugami folklore is actually quite gruesome, a dog spirit created through ritual animal cruelty, reflecting how extreme social stresses might lead folklore to secretly attacking rivals with magic. But it shows a darker side of regional folklore too. Not every local tale is about a fun-loving jokester yokai. Some are about curses and fear of one's neighbors, which are just as much part of the tapestry of folklore as anything else. But on a friendlier note, Kyushu is home to the kappa's watery haunts as well. The city of Fukuoka, for example, has kappa legends in its canals, and various villages in Kyushu have their own kappa laws. In fact, one town claims that kappa even taught them how to irrigate the fields. In some places, kappa are called by local names, like Gataro or Enka, and farmers once offered cucumbers, which is the kappa's favorite food, for protection. Kyushu's version of the well-known Isun Boshi, the one-inch boy, a Tom Thumb-like folk hero, has him starting his journey in Kyushu's rivers. And these regional twists again highlight that while some stories spread nationally, they often get localized flavors. And lastly, Kyushu's proximity to Okinawa and earlier contact with Korea and China, Nagasaki was a trade port, even during isolation, meant that some foreign folklore elements entered local lore. For example, the Karakasa Obake, the haunted umbrella, and other objects possibly drew on Chinese Taoist ideas of household spirits and the concepts of ghosts returning on the seventh day after death. That is found on some Kyushu stories, and it might reflect the blending with Chinese Buddhist mourning customs. Thus, Kyushu folklore is a pretty rich one of its own, with indigenous Japanese elements seasoned by a touch of outside influence, but ultimately all adapted to its own environment. Well, these glimpses of Tohoku, Shikoku, and Kyushu demonstrate how the local environment and history shape the character of regional legends. Mountainous, isolated regions produce tales of protective house spirits and terrifying mountain hags. Coastal and island regions spawn sea monsters and trickster animal tales. Places with intense religious significance yield ghostly morality stories and saintly miracles. Yet despite their differences, these regional traditions are all recognizably part of the larger fabric of Japanese folklore. And they share the common grammar too, yokai, yūrei, and also of festivals and faith, even if the dialects vary. Alright, well, that is enough for our Japanese folklore for today. I've done a few related videos like Shinto demonology and stuff like that, but there's a lot of different angles to approach this sort of thing from. And of course, continuing on from the folklore series, we had to get on to Japan eventually. So, here we are. I hope it lived up to your expectation. Now, I'm going to thank my top-tier patrons and supporters. That is Kimberly, Christine, Sally Ember, Susan, Cameron, Kerry, Charlene, Lynn, Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfednir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Ryan, Thor, Cameron, Stephen, Kevin, HMSHH, Crystal, Dalbury, Anthony, Lucy, Brandon, Guga Bubonic, Nicholas, Craig, Neftis, Alexander, Gokan, Dorsey, Venita, Claire, Carol, Courtesy, Robert, Mary, Bridget, Nefertari, Yvette, Miss Mochi, 11, Allison, Free American, Jennifer, Brittany, David, Cody, Brian, Are You My Mum? Rhonda, Carrie, Catty P, Lovely, Poma, Kevin, Marissa, Altazakin, Lucy, and Julianne. All right, thank you so much. Yeah, well, I really do think that if you're still listening, you tell me what you think in the comments. Most people are asleep by now. But yeah, maybe you are asleep. I don't know. If you're not asleep, thank you for listening to the whole thing. In any case, that's enough from me for tonight, and I will see you when you feel inclined to return. As always, lots of love to you all around the world. Look after yourselves, and farewell for now.